us for today? Is there a volunteer in there? Who is going to help us for today? No one. Let me quickly check whether I can help. Let me quickly check. Yeah, so if no one is willing to help, I probably have to pick up someone, either Tanya, Luke, Manan, Ella, anyone that I just finished mentioning. If you're okay with helping us for today, please go ahead. Ella, Tanya, John Luke, Lane, Kingo, anyone to help us, just let me know. Okay, sure. So as we started from last week, we ended with getting to see where the income effect and substitution effect plays a role. So you're going to end chapter 9 today by looking at the government and one of the powerful theorems that we have in macroeconomics, which is the Ricardian equivalence. So that will be the first part of today's discussion, and we'll quickly move on to chapter 11, which is pretty much broad as well. So just keep an eye on what we are just about doing. John, if you are ready, let me know, then we can start right away. Is John back or still working? Is John back? Okay, no problem. Before John joins us, anyone can also help us with the questions in the chat room. If there's any question you feel like reading it out, feel free. Questions?
Someone asked whether our final will be cumulative.
No, I don't think so, because the attendance has been good so far. About 45 as promised, so it wouldn't be cumulative. One thing I would like to point out here is the rest of the chapters are pretty much dependent on the earlier chapters. So you might want to keep yourself abreast with what you did in the previous chapters, so as to not to lose track of what we did so far. So it's not going to be cumulative, but it might be needed in trying to understand what we have right now. Any other question, Lynn?
There's no other questions.
Okay then. If John is ready, then we can start.
Okay, I'm ready.
Good. So from last week, from Tuesday, what we realized was that we had the consumption savings model, we had a 2-period model, and we saw what the household did in terms of their savings decision. We realized where the income and substitution effect plays a role and all that. Today, what we need to do here is to complete the model by looking at what the government also has in terms of its decision-making process. So remember, just like in the case of the household, the government has what we call the government spending, which we saw in the earlier chapters to be G. And before the government spends, we know for sure that it has to take taxes for us to finance the expenditure. So G equals T, which is a standard outcome that we saw in a comparative model. But remember, we do have 2 periods in here. So this might be period 1, where G equals T. Period 2, the government might have the same thing. G equals T. So the government tries to balance its budget and is doing everything right. It's not doing something outside of the budget. But this equation is very difficult to obtain. For every government, there might be some times where you might need higher consumption today, and your taxes might not be able to help you out. So there's a need for you to borrow. So here we have what we call B, which is the borrowing that's done by the government. So the government, in addition to the taxes, borrows maybe in the bond market, be it an open market operation, where it borrows monies to finance their expenditure. Now, given the fact that it has borrowed from this time period, when it comes here, it has to come back and pay the borrowing that it did. So basically, we have the situation where the government will now come in and pay what it has borrowed. So in trying to get the government expenditure for period 2, we have the taxes that it takes away from us from period 2. It spends on maybe infrastructure, be it road, hospitals, and whatnot. And it has to also pay for what it has borrowed. And remember, moving from period 1 to period 2, there's always the case of you paying an interest rate of R. So in addition to this B, the government will have to pay an interest rate of R. So this becomes 1 plus small r, or 1 plus big R, just like what we saw in the earlier chapters. So the government's budget constraint technically becomes, let's make that stop. The government's budget constraint just becomes this guy here, G2, plus this equals T2. If there's any question, let me know before we move ahead. This can be rewritten as T2 minus G2 all over 1 plus small r, or all over r, which is the same as B. So B equals this. We have this guy here too as well. Is there anyone with any question in there? Questions?
Not right now, no.
Not right now, good. So we have this guy here, which is the B. But remember, from equation 1, from the first period, we know what B is. So we can go back and replace B with what we know already. So at the end of the day, we have an equation that looks like this. G1 equals T1 plus, instead of B, we need to replace it with T2 minus G2 all over 1 plus R, or all over bigger R. So the government budget constraint now becomes something that looks like the lifetime constraint of the individual, where all the consumptions will be on one side and all the incomes will be on one side. So we have the situation where we have G1 plus G2 all over 1 plus R, small r, or as we pointed out earlier, it can be bigger R to represent everything, and T1 plus T2 all over 1 plus R. So there's the lifetime budget constraint of the government. So if you're able to derive this from scratch, then it should be fine. Questions, John? John Luke, questions?
Yes, we do have a question here. Is the interest rate for government equal to that for consumer, and can we use both? Can we both use capital R to stand for 1 plus R?
Yeah. Because remember, the government tends to borrow from the household, right? And the household is the one that gives the government pretty much the loan that it needs. And it might also be the case that the government might be running a surplus, where the government will now have to send the loans to the household. So it happens between the government and the household, because these are the two key players, and they determine the same R between each other. Yeah, they have a consistent R. And as he rightly pointed out, to make your life easier, you can represent everything here with a bigger R instead of 1 plus R to make the equation easier. Any further question?
Not right now, no.
Good. So if you are done with the government, one important indication here is that I have a lifetime budget constraint, and I have, this is my expenditure, this is my revenue. Now, this is going to be an interesting proposition by Ricardian. So make sure you stop me if it's not clear. Ricardian equivalence basically talks about the government's action, what the government does, and the reaction that we expect to see from the household. So what the government does and the reaction that we expect to see from the household. Ricardian says that given everything to be constant, if the government takes an action, for instance, it takes an action that, hey, I'm going to reduce taxes. The government promises the household that, hey, I'm going to reduce taxes. If everything else remains constant, this guy is constant, this guy is constant, interest rate doesn't change. Interest rate here doesn't change, this guy doesn't change, and this guy here has been promised to go down. I know the government spends on average $100 for the entire period. Today, the government comes to me and then has promised me that they are going to reduce taxes for today. If this guy is constant, what do we expect this guy to be? Anyone to help us? T2. To go up, right? John, was that you?
Yes.
We expect T2 to go up, right? We expect T2 to go up in order to have this balanced expenditure. Without T2 going up and T1 coming down as promised by the government, it will be difficult to maintain this balance. So the household, in its own estimation, has this whole idea that when the government promises a tax cut of T1 today, they will come back in the future, the household will expect T2 to go up. That's the expectation from the household because they've already done the math, they know the equation by the government, and they will react towards that. So if you happen to be a household where you expect taxes tomorrow to increase, what will happen to your consumption decision? What will happen to your savings decision? And that's where the whole idea of Ricardian equivalence comes in. So given that we know consumption is smoothening, and given that we expect taxes to increase tomorrow, what should we do as individuals or as consumers? Are we expected to save more or are we expected to save less? Anyone to help us? John, anyone with any comment in there?
Yeah, most people are saying you save more today, something
Exactly.
variation on that.
Good. So we expect savings to increase because we expect taxes to increase tomorrow and we really want to be poor. If we don't save against tomorrow and taxes have increased, exponentially, we pay more taxes and we don't have enough to live on. And we end up not smoothing our consumption. So Ricardian equivalence says that given that these parameters are kept constant with the promise of the reduction in taxes, household will not consume that tax break that was given to them, but rather save that tax as against the expectation of an increase in taxes tomorrow in order to smoothen their consumption. So that's the whole idea. Now, one implication here is that maybe in the midterm or the final, I might ask, if the government reduces their taxes today, and they accompany it with the promise that they are also going to reduce how much they spend tomorrow, should we expect the same reaction from the household? Anyone? No. What do we expect the household to do with the money then? What do we expect the house, to consume it, right? Yeah, we expect them to spend that money, yeah. So just keep an eye on these guys. If I happen to change them during the midterm or something, just let me know. And so I'm gonna stop here with the Ricardian equivalence. It might come in handy if you understand it. If not, then please pay attention to it. Questions?
No, sir, not at the moment.
Okay. Before we finish with the Ricardian equivalence, this is just going to be an open-ended discussion. What do we think might be some of the flaws or some of the situations that might lead to the Ricardian equivalence not holding? What might lead to the failure of the Ricardian equivalence? Imagine everything is okay, as Ricardian has predicted. This guy is constant, this guy is constant, this guy has gone down. What might be some of the reasons that we wouldn't expect savings to increase? Anyone? John, is there anyone with any comments in there?
Yeah, Tanya says, if only some people get tax cuts as opposed to everyone.
Okay, that might be an argument. But remember, let's assume that everybody is representative. We don't have heterogeneous agents in here. Yeah, right? So yeah, that's a good point. But for now, our assumption is that we have a representative agent. Anyone with any additional comments?
I was thinking maybe if you have multiple periods beyond just the two, then the government doesn't necessarily have to increase taxes next period. They can just kick the tax increase further and further down the line. And so the households may not save in the same way because they don't predict that it will immediately change the taxes back or increase them.
That's a good point as well. But again, they might want to also spread that tax cut along the additional period given, right? So instead of saving $10 for the next period, if they have to live for maybe 20 more years, they will have to save maybe $1 each, right? So that's a good point. Yeah. So let me ask this. What if yeah, anyone with any question?
Yeah, Alex asks, what about unit tax?
What about unit tax in terms of, yeah, remember the unit tax in itself, we assumed that we had more or less like an endowment given to the individual in terms of their income. So we come to more sophisticated tax, regimes like the unit tax and where you have to work and all that. Remember here, we are not working. We are just assuming that you just get given Y1 without you working. So where would the unit tax come in? It will be difficult to disentangle it, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's keep unit tax for chapter 11. Further comments? So imagine a situation where you have your populace or the consumers having a very bad math understanding. They don't understand math. Do you think it will hold? It will hold up?
Oh,
if they don't,
they might be more motivated to just consume instead
exactly.
of. Oh, okay.
Yeah. They will just go ahead and consume it, right?
Alex asks, will the increase in T2 or T2 over 1 plus R equal the decrease in T1?
Yeah, it will be equal to the decrease in order to maintain the balance. So this guy is always fixed. This decrease should be matched with this guy here. So we expect them to do the entire math. They know that the R is given and they'll go along with that one.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
So just think about what might lead to a couple of failures in terms of the prediction by Ricardian. Right. So another example. What if, as John pointed out, so John, try and reverse your answer in terms of the number of periods.
Oh, so if there were only one period?
Exactly. What if we have only older people who live in just the next period and they're just going to die after the period after, right? What do you expect?
So there are people who are only
Older.
affected by the tax decrease and not by the tax increase because they're going to be dead in the next period?
Exactly. That might be one part of it. And that comes back to what Tanya pointed out. If you have different category of people in terms of, is it that the younger people are going to react towards it? Is it that we have a special group that are enjoying it and other groups are not enjoying it and all that? So these are a couple of things that you have to just keep an eye on. All good?
Yeah, no questions
Good.
as of right now.
Okay, good. If there are no questions, then we just move on to chapter 11, where we start with a more sophisticated model of the two-period consumption, as well as chapter 4. It will be a build-up on the two. So it's going to be a lot. If you guys read it, you realize that we had a lot of things under chapter 11 to deal with. So I'll start by looking at the very simple model of the representative agent. So imagine the situation where, so this is where we have the real intertemporal model with investments. So this is going to be a lot. The setup of this model is to understand what the consumer does, or the household. We need to understand what the firm does and their decision. We need to understand what the government does. The government is fairly simple, mostly what we saw in the earlier chapters hold here. Then we come to the last part of it, where we determine the supply and the demand. So what the household does is what we know already from chapter 4 and what we just saw in chapter 9. So I will just build up on that too to make the budget constraint more sophisticated, given the combination of the two. What the firm does is what we saw in chapter 4 as well. But here, because we live for 2 periods, I'll build up on the fact that the firm will have a couple of investment decisions to make for the next period. And the government is just like what we saw right now. There's not much in terms of the differences. Then given what this 3 gives us, we will just go on to determine what the supply looks like in terms of the supply of goods and what the demand looks like in terms of the demand of goods. So that will be the whole idea under chapter 11. So if you have any questions before we start in it, let me know. If you want to know more about the motivation around it and all that, let me know as well. So let's quickly go to the household, get to see what the household does, and let's see what the decision is there for the household. So I'll start by looking at the household. Remember, we saw from chapter 4 that the household has a consumption decision to make, C. And this comes from the fact that the household is working. So back to what Alex asked earlier, instead of an endowment from chapter 9, we now have a working decision in terms of the wage. So here you can introduce in the unit task and see what the implication would be. So we have this decision that the household makes, plus the fact that the household holds a firm where the profit comes in, minus the fact that the household will have to pay a couple of taxes in terms of big T. So if this is the budget constrained by the household from chapter 4, back to chapter 9, we realize that the household lives for 2 periods. So given that the household lives for 2 periods, we need to introduce in an additional factor, which is a savings decision that the household does, the private savings decision, because almost everything that we saw here. So let me label this guy here as Z. So everything here equals Z. So this is the additional dimension that you have to bring in terms of moving from chapter 4 to chapter 5. Is there anyone with any question in there? Questions?
Not at the moment, no.
Good. Again, within chapter 9, we saw that the household lives for 2 periods, right? So this will be the first budget constraint for the first period. For the second period, it's just going to be C equals, I'm going to do something tricky here. Please point to me if I'm right or not. W H minus L plus pi minus this guy. So let me know if I'm right or wrong, given what I just did here. Which part of this equation will be wrong? Anyone with any suggestion? Which part of this second period equation by the household will be wrong, given what we did in chapter 9?
Should savings be added to the other side with a 1 plus R?
Exactly. So here, savings wouldn't be here because there's not going to be any savings decision in period 2. So just like what John pointed out, savings in period 2 is just going to be 0 because you leave for 2 periods and there's no need for you to save in the second period, getting to know that you are going to die. So savings for second period is going to be 0. So this guy is off. Now back to what he pointed out again, we do have to add the fact that we saved in the first period, which is SP, and our savings comes with an interest rate, which is 1 plus R. So this becomes the new budget constraint for the second period for the household. If you have any question, let me know. So these are a couple of things that you have to keep your eye on as you move on from the chapter to chapter. Questions? So if you happen to be in the chat room, write your name and write present. Now, for the choices that the household is going to make, now that we are done with the budget constraint, we need to understand the choices that the household makes. So remember, in chapter 4, the household makes a decision as to how much to consume, which is C. It also makes a decision as to how much leisure to have, which is L, just like the opposite of how much to work, right? So we have C and L. Additionally, we also have the fact that he lives in 2 periods for chapter 9. So we have C prime and we have L prime, or L for period 2 and C for period 2. So these are the decisions that the household is going to make given the introduction of the 2 period. If you understand the basis of this argument, then it's much easier for us to work around it. So if you can change the budget constraint, then make sure you can also solve the Lagrangian after doing that. Then life becomes easier.
I was just curious.
Yes.
Don't you also choose savings as well?
Correct. You also choose savings, but the good news here is, given the fact that you have, that's a very good question. If I have C, right, plus S equals Y, or W multiplied by my income.
I see.
If I know this guy, and I choose how much to consume, then technically I'll get to know how much to save, right?
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So if you work in an accounting firm and you are giving I know your income to be $100, and you come to me and you tell me that, hey, I just finished spending $60. Automatically, I'll get to know that you save 40, right?
I see.
So we don't necessarily have to bring it, but if you bring it, it's not wrong. Yeah. Okay. Questions?
No, sir.
Okay, good. So let's quickly go on to within the same household, remember, we just finished looking at what the budget constraint of the household will look like. Now, I'm going to change a couple of assumptions that we made for the household. So the very first assumption that we made for the household, remember we mentioned that when W, again, we are still with the household. Keep in mind these changes. We mentioned that when W goes up, income effect is high and substitution effect brings this guy down low. So at the end of the day, our labor supply is unknown. This was the intuition that we had under the chapter 4. Whenever wage increases, income effect implies that work harder. No, income effect implies that, yeah, you might want to call it, income effect implies that your labor supply goes down, while substitution effect means that your labor supply goes up. So given this ambiguity, we don't know what happens to the total labor supply at the end of the day, right? So what we are going to do here is we are going to take a stand. We're going to assume that, hey, whenever wage goes up, the substitution effect is always going to be greater than the income effect. And given that assumption, we have an increase in labor supply. So keep in mind this assumption that we just made to make our lives easier, to see how the economy reacts to a couple of changes. So we've taken a stand now. Is there anyone with a question?
Not right now, no.
Good. The second stand we need to take here is this guy here, the interest rate. So remember, we also mentioned in chapter 9 that with an increase in interest rates, we don't know what happens to the entire economy, because there might be a situation where you might want to consume more and a situation where you might want to consume less. So these are two, factors that we didn't know much about. For this, we are going to take a stand as well and see that whenever there is an increase in interest rates, we have an increase in the amount of labor that we do supply. So if I happen to work for Tim Hortons and the interest rate happens to be 10%, and I work for 5 hours in a week, and the bank comes in and goes like, hey, the interest rate has now increased to $100. The whole idea here is you might want to go and work harder, save more, put it in the bank, get this higher interest so that your life becomes much comfortable at the end of the day. So you are substituting away from leisure, which is now very expensive, to work. Question?
Do have a question? Yes. Will this depend on whether or not the consumer is a saver or a lender, or whether the consumer is a saver or a lender?
So that's a good question. We are assuming that the substitution effect is taking away most of the effect. So it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, right? So whenever R goes up, labor supply goes up. We are not making any distinction as to whether you are a borrower or a lender. Overall, substitution effect is higher. Is that okay? We just want to see how that affects the labor supply decision at the end of the day. Yeah.
Okay, so substitution effect will always dominate.
Exactly, for this chapter. Yeah, because if we keep it ambiguous, you wouldn't be able to see what's happening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So these are the two things that we've seen so far. And lastly, with the same increase in interest rates, the implication here is that your consumption goes down. Again, the substitution effect outweighs the income effect. Remember, right? So initially we said when an interest rate goes up, individuals would like to save more, and that will be the substitution effect. The income effect will say that individual might want to save less because they now feel richer. So we weren't very sure as to where the income effect and substitution effect will lead us to in terms of the combination of the two. Now we've taken a stand that the substitution effect outweighs the income effect, and given that, we expect individuals to save more whenever there's an increase in interest rate. So 3 strong assumptions, and that will be our building block for the consumer. Does anyone have any question?
No questions right now, no.
So if I ask, we can easily draw this. So there's a positive relationship between interest rates and how much we work. There's a positive relationship between interest rates and how much we consume, a negative in terms of how much we consume. And there's going to be a positive relationship between wage increments and labor supply. So get to know how to draw these 3 curves. So having done with the household, let's quickly go to the, I believe, the firm, and get to see what the firm does. Again, remember the decision by the firm. We have the situation where this becomes the output by the firm. To produce anything in this economy, from chapter 4, we saw that the firm does this. So this is the firm from what we knew earlier. The profit of the firm is given to us as this from the earlier chapter, Y minus W, and how much we tend to pay for the workers from chapter 4. Now, given the combination of chapter 4 and chapter 9, which now has the idea of leaving for 2 periods, the firm will have to adjust its decision-making process. And that is to say, the firm will now have to make an investment decision, getting to know that it's leased not for only 1 period, but for 2 periods. So here, I have the profit of the firm, just like what we saw, minus the investment decision that it makes. Remember, investment is coming from how much you produce or how much you have. Couple of your inventory, you don't use it in the current period, you might want to push it to the next period so that you have higher level of capital. So instead of having this, you are also saving some part of your inventory for tomorrow. So that's going to be your I. So this becomes your new profit if you attach chapter 9 to the argument. Just like what we saw in the solo model, remember investments, we can use the law of motion of capital. Investment basically comes from the fact that for you to determine your capital for next period, which is capital for period 2, it is always going to be 1 minus the depreciated capital for this period, plus how much you've invested. So this is going to be a very powerful equation, just like what we saw in the solo growth model. So this becomes the new model for the firm for period 1. So this is for period 1. Now let's go to period 2. For period 2, the profit for period 2 for the firm has almost the same taste, but we need to make an additional adjustment to the profit. So this is going to be pi for period 2, your output for period 2 minus the wage that is being charged in period 2, the labor that you take in period 2. As we pointed out, you know you are going to leave for 2 periods and you are going to die thereafter. So if I happen to work at Tim Hortons and I know that my contract, if I happen to work at SFU as a Tim Hortons restaurant and I know that my contract ends at the end of this year and I don't want to work anymore, if I get the profit for this period, all the chairs, tables, cups, and whatnot, I'll just put them on Amazon or put them on Craigslist and sell them. So that's the whole idea. All the excess capital that you have that you didn't use, which is left for you, after the depreciation, you sell them. And they will come back to you as a profit, additional profit. So instead of this guy being minus, this is going to be positive. And remember, your I is just going to be 0 because you're not going to invest for the coming term again. Is there anyone with any additional, with any question in there?
So Alex asks, is K2 equal to K prime or K apostrophe?
Exactly, yeah. Sorry about the notation, yeah. For the next period, yeah.
Oh, and then this might be a bit of a silly question, but I'm kind of curious.
Yeah.
So we're assuming that at the end of the second period, the firms close and the households die or stop participating, right?
Yeah.
So, I guess I'm wondering, who is the capital being sold to? Is there like is it being sold to the government or?
That's a good question. So if you look at the chapter critically, you realize that there is a one-to-one transition process between the capital to output, right?
Okay.
So for every capital, you can just turn it to consumption. For every capital, you can just turn it to consumption.
I see.
Yeah. So it's not as if the chairs and tables, nobody will be willing to buy them. That's a good assumption. But for every capital that you have, it can be easily turned into consumption good.
Okay.
So you can just consume it right away.
And then we have another question here.
Sure.
Can the investment in period 2 equal investment in period 1 divided by 1 plus R?
I didn't get that. Can the investment in period 2, is it this guy?
I think it would be I, like I2.
There's not going to be I2 in this model, right? Remember, there's I2, you're going to die.
Oh, okay. Yeah, in place of K2 times 1 minus D.
So I have 1 minus D, I have K. You want to put this guy here? Is it here? Lynn, do you mind?
I was asking if instead of 1 minus DK2, we can put, because 1 minus DK2 is the investment that was made in period 1. So can that be the investment made in period 1 divided by 1 plus R instead of 1 minus DK2?
Actually, we need to be a bit more careful here. In terms of this guy, it's not necessarily the investment that was made in period 1, right? It is more or less like the investment that we had earlier plus the investment that we made in period 1 coming to period 2. At the end of the day, this guy here represents all the capital that was left unused. So it might be coming from different sources. So if you look at this guy, right, it's a combination of what we had earlier plus the investment that we made in the first period. This guy here combines almost everyone. It has this guy included. It has the investment that you made as well.
Understood.
Okay. If it's not clear, please let me know. Feel free to draw my attention. Further questions?
No, I think that's it for now.
Okay, good. So if we are done with this, then we can quickly see what so we are done with how to look at the firm's profits and the firm's investment and all that. So what we have to do here is we also have to take a stand as to what we expect the firm to do when we have a couple of changes. So the very first thing, just like what we saw in the case of the household, is whenever we have an increase in wages. And remember, the firm does a couple of things. The firm demands labor demand, ND. So here we expect the firm to reduce their demand for labor consistent with chapter 4 whenever the wage increases. This is the first part. The second part has to do with the interest rates. And for that, I need to take you guys through one or two things here. Just to remind you guys again from chapter 4, we saw that when Z increases, be it subsidy or technology or efficiency, we expect the labor demand to also increase because the marginal product of labor increases. So these are the two things that we have to keep in mind. Not much in terms of the differences from what we saw in chapter 4. For the investment decision made by the firm, this is going to be much trickier, and please keep an eye on it. You might see it in the quiz or probably in the finals. I'm saying that so that you can stop me and ask further questions.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what happens if Z increases?
Oh, Z, remember the efficiency for the assignment and your quiz 2, and as well as your midterm 1. Whenever there's an increase in Z, the demand for labor increases.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's efficiency. So let's have a look at this. The investment decision made by the firm. There's going to be a cost that you pay, cost, and there's going to be a benefit for every investment that you make. So you go to the bank, you ask the bank, is there any question? John?
Sorry,
John,
my apologies. My microphone was muted. Yes, if Z is equal to N is equal to the marginal product of labor, will an increase in Z still increase labor demand?
Yeah, it will increase the line up, right? It will increase the line up. Whose question was that, please?
That was Alex.
Alex, remember this this graph that we saw? I believe it might be somewhere here. And this is Z equals W. Remember this graph?
He says, I was thinking the cost increases as well.
Not necessarily. It will depend on the transition. You have to look at what the firm does first in terms of their demand. The household will come in terms of their supply decision, and it's end up moving the cost up. But the initial impact is that whenever Z goes up, with no changes in what the household is doing in terms of their supply, obviously we expect the demand to increase. Is that okay?
Okay, yes.
So this is the cost by the household. So by the firm. So for the decision-making process by the firm, they go to the bank, they would like to borrow from the bank and invest. The bank will say, hey, you have to pay an interest rate of R for every unit of loan that we give you, be it in terms of cash or real value, nominal or real value. So we have R given to us. You take the loan from the bank, getting to know that you're going to pay a cost, be it a marginal cost of R at the end of the day for every unit that you take. You come, you buy capital with it. This capital might be maybe a Tim Hortons coffee machine, and for every R, this machine might give you maybe 10 cups of coffee. So for every R, it gives you a given amount of coffee. So this is what we call the marginal product of the capital that you just had. So there's going to be a marginal product of capital. So you took the loan, you bought a coffee machine. The coffee machine is giving you a marginal product at each and every specified period of time. But one additional thing you have to also keep in mind is for every hour that the machine works for you, it will also have to depreciate. So not only do you have this guy here, there's going to be an additional factor of depreciation. That takes away what you have here.
So we have a question.
Sure, feel free.
Will depreciation be considered as cost in this case?
You might want to take it as a cost, but it's not a direct cost, right? It's not a direct cost. But if you finish arranging your equations, it might move to the other side and it might be considered as a cost. But to have an intuitive understanding of what's going on, you have to take it as understanding this guy here in terms of the net benefit. This is the net benefit. If you understand net benefit, then you are technically putting into your equation the fact that there's going to be an equation, a depreciation. That takes away a couple of benefits that comes with it. So think about it in terms of net benefit. And with net benefit, you are taking into account depreciation. But if you go ahead and put depreciation in here, it might be difficult to explain intuitively, even though it doesn't make any much of a difference. Is that okay? Yeah. You don't pay depreciation cost to the person that you take the money from. You only pay the interest rate of taking the money from. So the opportunity cost of you investing is how much you pay in terms of the interest rate. So this guy is just okay being here without the depreciation.
Okay.
Yes? If it's not clear, let me know.
That's all.
Okay. So we have the fact that for every investment decision that you make, it comes with a marginal cost. It comes with depreciation that comes with it as well. And you also have to pay the cost that we have here. So if everyone understands this setup in terms of the marginal benefit and marginal cost, I would like to put them in an intuitive equation setup. So let's quickly see what the equation looks like. Yeah, question.
Is R on the right side, is that just R or is that 1 plus R?
It's R for now, okay, because we take it as the marginal cost.
Oh, okay. So in the current period, when we're doing the borrowing, the cost is R, but then in the next period, it would be 1 plus R, or?
Take it as going to the bank, right? Let me see whether this example works. Let's take it as going to the bank and you borrow $100 from the bank. The interest rate that you pay at the bank is going to be maybe 10%. So by taking $100, you are paying 10% on it, which is $10, right? So this $10 is just the R.
Okay.
So this is the cost of you taking the $100 from the bank. Now, if you are to use this $100 and then invest it in Tim Hortons, and for the $100 invested in Tim Hortons, it gives you a profit of maybe $12, then that will be the marginal benefit plus 1 minus D of the marginal benefit or depreciation. So the $12 is this guy. The R is just the interest that you are paying without adding the principal. If you put 1 plus R here, it means you are adding the principal to it, the principal that you took, the original principal.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And then we have one more question. Can we think of R as rental rate?
Yeah. It might be the rental rate or the cost of you investing in the specified capital. Further questions?
None right now, no.
Okay then. So let's finish with the equation here, and let's see what we have. So the cost is on one side of the equation, R, the marginal benefit, or the marginal benefit, which is MP, K, plus 1 minus the depreciation rate that counts with it. Having said this, as we pointed out, we have or just the depreciation rate. I think I would just make it minus the depreciation rate to make life easier. So this is the marginal benefit, this is the cost. Now let's do a couple of comparative stats. What happens to this equation if I have this guy to be greater than this? What happens to your decision? What decision will you make? Class, what decision are we going to make? If the cost of we borrowing from the bank is higher than the benefit of we investing in a capital, what decision are we going to make? Are we going to invest or are we not going to invest? Invest.
Not going to invest, yeah.
We're not going to invest. So you are not going to invest. Osama is not going to invest. Myself, I'm not going to invest. what happens? So investment is going to go down. What happens to the capital level if investment is down? First, what happens to capital level if investment is down?
It will also go down.
It goes down, right? We have the capital level to be down. Now, this is going to be the class the question that you might find interesting. What happens to the marginal product of capital if capital level is down?
It's going to go up.
Exactly, right? So this guy goes back up. So if this guy is back up, what happens to this guy?
Will equalize.
It will be?
It will equalize.
Exactly, it will equalize. It will go back to normal. So this equation is maintained. So keep the transition process in mind. You don't know where you might find it. If you have questions, let me know. So that's the entire decision-making process by the firm, getting to know whether it wants to invest, whether it doesn't want to invest, and all that. So if you go to the book, for the diagrams, I'll leave the diagrams for you guys to digest. It's in the book. It's fairly easy to understand. Make sure you understand the diagrams, and it's examinable. You might find it in the quiz or the finals for the diagrams. Having said that, let's quickly do one additional exercise and go for break. The final exercise we need to do here is the idea of friction. So remember this equation. Remember this interest rate. So I'm going to introduce in the idea of information asymmetry. Information asymmetry basically says that I don't know much about the person I'm giving the money to. He might be a good guy who comes back and then give me my money, or he might be a bad guy who might just run away with my money. So I'm faced with a bad guy and I'm faced with a good guy as well. I don't know who is good, I don't know who is bad. Given the fact that I don't know who is good and I don't know who is bad, I'll just assume everybody to be almost the same and charge a risk premium. So when you come to me and you would like to borrow, I go like, hey, I don't know whether you might come back and pay me my money. Even though the original interest rate is 10%, I might want to charge you an additional 5% for the risk that I'm facing. So here, the cost of you borrowing in a situation where there is information asymmetry, where you don't know the good type and the bad type, is the original cost plus the risk premium. What do we think happens to this equation if risk premium is added? So it basically means that this guy is going to be higher than the marginal benefit. So with information asymmetry, the level of investment is going to go down because the cost of borrowing is pretty much high. Is that okay with everyone? Questions?
Seems okay. No questions.
Now the question for the class is, what do we think happens when maybe Lynn produces a good technology like the credit rating score? What do we think happens to the risk premium charge? Is it going to be high or is it going to be low? Low, right? It's going to be low because we can just see who is the bad type. We can just see who is the good type. The bad type will be charged a higher fee, and then the good type will be charged a lower fee, something like that. So just keep it in mind. Get to see how that affects this investment decision, how that affects the lines, and all that. if you have questions, ask. If not, then let's quickly go for 5 minutes break and come back at 10:37 to finish up what we started on chapter 11. If there are no questions, feel free to take the break, and I'll come back in 5 minutes to continue. Okay. So if you guys are back, let me know, and let's quickly start. Are we back, John?
Yeah, I think we're back. Oh,
Okay.
someone has a question. If
Sure.
the risk premium is high and investment goes down, will the equation balance out again like before?
Yeah, it will balance out as before, but the implication is that we will have a much lower level of capital at the end of the day. Yeah.
Okay.
Questions? So if you happen to be in the chat room again, just type your name and type present, and let's start. Okay. So let's quickly see where we stop, and let's see where we are heading towards. So we started by looking at what the consumer does, given chapter 4 and chapter 9, what the firm does, given chapter 4 and chapter 9. I'm leaving out the government because the decision-making process is just the same as what we saw in chapter 9. So the government is out for now. Now, where we are moving towards to is basically trying to determine how the aggregate level of output will be determined in terms of the demand and in terms of the supply. So we start by looking at the labor market, and let's see what the outcome is going to be in terms of the output supply. So just remember what we saw. Due to the strong assumptions that we made, this will be the number of hours of work, or you might want to call it the employment rate, which is N. And remember, this guy here is going to be our wage. Given the strong assumption that we made under the household setting, where we basically said that there's going to be a positive relationship between the amounts of hours of work, it is easier to get this line, which is the amount of supply from the household, because we believe the substitution effect is higher than the income effect. Additionally, we also said under the household, their decision-making process will depend on the interest rate that has been promised to them. And again, with the interest rate, we assume that the substitution effect is equally higher. So with that as well, this becomes the supply curve from the household. The demand curve from the firm, just like what we saw earlier, is just going to be the consistent demand curve that we've seen over the past week. So this is my demand, this is my supply. At the end of the day, I have an equivalent level of wage. I have a given number of labor markets, be it employment or whatever you might want to call it in terms of supply or demand. So this is the first part of the labor supply and labor demand market. And given that we now know the amount of N, remember before we produce anything, it depends on N. So our output, which is basically Y equals Z as a function of N and K. So if I know my N star, I can determine my Y star. So when I put N here, which is consistent with this axis, I can equally draw a curve that captures the relationship between the two. Now, I already have the value of my N, so I can put it back here. This is my N, just like what we realized in the labor market. And with this N, I can determine my output in the market. So the combination of these two graphs should be known to us. Just make sure you understand the fact that they all have the same axis in terms of the N, and getting to know the N star here will determine the Y star here. Is there anyone with a question in there? Questions, John?
Not at the moment, no.
Good. So if you're done with the labor market, let's quickly go to the amount of labor that determine
Uh-oh. I think so. Yeah, somebody else is the host, yeah. What to do? Should we wait for him to rejoin, or should we try and rejoin? Ah, there he is.
Given that we have this guy here, the end is just the output will be determined in this sense.
Oh,
John, was there a
excuse me.
question?
Well, actually, you just
John, was there a question?
you just disconnected
John?
for a few seconds. And
John?
so, hello?
Yeah.
Hello,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Hi, you just disconnected for a little bit, and so we didn't hear the last few things that you were explaining. Also,
Oh.
your screen is on its side. It's kind of upside down.
Sorry. Let me see.
No worries.
Let's see how it works. Is it okay now?
Yes, it's much better now. Could you just go through what you were doing before? The last graph that you have written down there, because we didn't see it.
Good. So the last graph is just this one, right? The last graph is just this one.
Oh, okay.
That one will be coming soon. So let me just use this one to explain what I just did earlier. So this is the labor demand from the firm. This is the labor supply from the household. And the situation where the labor supply and the labor demand meet determines the amount of labor that we have or the employment figure that we have at the end of the day. And we have a wage that determines that. So we have these two. But remember, before we produce, we need an amount of N, and that N has been determined in the labor market. So with this N from the labor market, we can transfer it to the output to determine the amount of output that we have. Is that okay with everyone?
Seems that way, yeah.
Okay, so these are the two key graphs that we looked at earlier before the break in the transition. What I also wanted to point out here is when we are dealing with the amount of labor supply by the household, remember, it is uniquely identified as a function of the interest rate, wherein a higher interest rate leads to a higher amount of work time, or labor supply. So that is very key. Unlike the firm's demand for labor, which is not a function of interest rate. So keep the two in mind. The third graph that we have here is the graph that captures the relationship between interest rate and output. And this is going to be very key. This is going to be very key, where we have the interest rate and then the output. So we have this guy here. We have the interest rate here. The output that we have is going to be drawn here. We need to understand the movement between interest rate and output. If I have an interest rate, which is R1, and then the interest rate moves to R2, what will be the implication on our graph? So let's assume the situation that this guy happens to be the labor supply at the point where the interest rate happens to be R1. Question to the class. What happens to our labor supply when the interest rate moves a bit higher? What happens to the amount of hours that we would like to work? Do we want to work more or less hours with a higher value? So this guy increases. So there's an additional increment in the amount of labor supply that we have here. So this guy goes much higher. So I have a labor supply at the point where the interest rate is higher, where R2 is greater than R1. R2 is greater than R1. Now, given that, this becomes my new amount of hours of work. So I just push it down here. So this is my N1, and this guy here is going to be my N2. And remember, N is the same as N here. So I push it back down here to determine the amount of output produced. With this, my output produced is much higher. This is Y2, this is Y1. With an increase in output, I can clearly see what's going to happen here. So if this guy happens to be somewhere here, at the point where this one is Y1, then this guy is going to be not consistent because you don't have the same axis. This guy is going to be much higher. So I have a graph that clearly tells me that with an increase in interest rate, there's going to be an increase in the amount of output supply. So output supply as a function of interest rate is increasing. So with a higher interest rate, there's going to be a higher supply of labor, and as more people work, there's going to be more output. So interest rates increases, output increases. So this is going to be the output supply curve. Is there anyone with any question in there?
Not right now, no. Oh, yes, just one came in. Is it linear or increasing?
Not necessarily linear, no. Because a couple of things will play to the determination of the nature of the YS, like how does the production function look like? How does the transition between R and N looks like? So these are the things that we need to look at. If, for instance, R affects the amount of labor supply 1-for-1, and labor supply also affects output 1-for-1, then we might have a linear function. But for now, we've not made any assumption about the function of the labor supply in terms of its relationship to interest rates, and we don't know the relationship of the labor supply to output, so we can't make that decision. Yeah.
Okay.
Question? Further question?
No, not right now.
Good. So this is the first part of it. We've now identified the relationship between these two. So I'm going to still be on this graph. Yeah, question?
Yes. Since two actually, do we have to keep in view the point of what would happen if y as a function of r increases or decreases here?
Yeah, we do, but that's where I think I'm just about to tackle, where we look at specific parameters that affect the decision-making process of either the household or the firm, and let's see how that transition into our R. But for now, it might not be interesting to just look at a direct relationship between R and YS without looking at what happens in the beginning, right? You have to like start from the scratch and tell us where the effects are playing important roles and where the transition leads us to. Yeah, that's why we need the first two graphs before we make a final determination here. So let's take an example here where we have an increase in G. And remember, G is government spending. What do we expect to see when there's an increase in G? So let me quickly take this guy out. So this becomes our standard diagram. If you want to see what the standard diagram looks like, this is the standard diagram. All the places where we have N1 happens to be our standard diagram. We need this guy because it tells us the shape of the relationship. Yeah. So this is our standard diagram. Now let's see what happens when the government comes in and increases G. What happens when government increases government spending? G. What happens? Anyone to help us? So from what we saw in chapter 4, in equilibrium, in a comparative equilibrium, G equals what? In a comparative equilibrium, let's start exactly, G equals T, right? When the government increases G, what would that imply about our T? Anyone? We know that G equals T in the competitive equilibrium, so T increases. And what did we say about non-wage income under chapter 4? We made a very specific determination. With an increase in taxes, what happens to our income? Anyone? Our income decreases, right? Is that okay with everyone? With John?
Yeah.
With an increase in taxes, what happens to our non-wage income? Anyone with any?
Yeah. Alex says it would decrease.
It will decrease, right? So, with a decrease in our non-wage income, what then happens to our labor supply? Anyone to help us?
It'll go up, correct?
Yeah, it will increase. We have to work more to finance our consumption, right?
Okay.
Is that okay with everyone? If it's confusing, let me know. If you have questions, I'm gonna pause for 1 minute or two. Let me know if it's confusing. I can go back to the transition process. Questions in there, John?
So Alex is saying, if we think of T as an income tax, will you work less?
Oh no, remember it's a lump sum tax. That's why I called it a non-wage income.
Oh yes, but I think he's asking if T was an income tax or like a per unit tax on working, then would you work less?
No, you might want to work more if you think of it as the substitution effect outweighing our income effect in this chapter. You can take a stand.
Okay.
Right? With that assumption, you can take the stand. Right?
But only in this chapter. In other chapters, we would say it would be ambiguous.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So given that, we have this guy to G goes up, taxes goes up, our income reduces. With a reduction in our income, we have to work more. Labor supply increases, just like what you guys pointed out. And remember, there is no change to interest rates as of now. There is no change to interest rate. So what we expect to see here is that there's going to be an increase in the amount of our labor supply, given the same amount of interest rates, which hasn't changed. With the same amount of interest rates, which hasn't changed, and an accompanied increase in labor supply, we have NS to increase. And the amount of employment increases to N2. And with N2, Y2 also increases. With Y2, this guy also increases. So if this is my first labor supply, sorry, guys. This is the same R. This is the same R1. Nothing has changed. If I used to be somewhere here, and I have this supply curve, with the same R, I'm still going to move somewhere much higher. My supply is going to increase. The amount of this guy increases. Is that okay with everyone? Let me know if you have questions. So here there's an increase in supply in Y2. And this is Y1. So supply increases, output supply increases. And you can show output supply increasing when the line moves towards your right. Just like in the case of labor supply increasing, it increases whenever the line moves to your right. The same thing happens here. The most important thing here is we still have the same interest rate, which hasn't changed. So make sure it is on the same interest rate line. Nothing has changed, and then the supply has increased.
Okay, we have a question. Is that because labor supply increases? Do they always move together?
Yeah, they move together because with an increase in labor supply, the production function, which is dependent on labor supply, also increases, right? If you have more people working, you should have more output. Unless, of course, we make an additional assumption that maybe capital level has reduced. Then we can't see whether labor supply is going to increase or decrease. But at this stage, with a given amount of capital level which is fixed or which hasn't changed, whenever there is an increase in amount of labor supply, for sure our output will have to increase as well. Is that okay for everyone?
Okay, sounds good. Oh, can you give an example of Z increasing?
Yeah, Z increasing is very interesting. You find it in the book as well. So let me see how to deal with that. So again, let's start from the scratch. If you happen to be around, write your name and type yes. You type present, please. So this is my labor. This is my output supply. This guy here. This is my Z. Right? So back to what Alex has asked us to do. He has asked us to analyze a situation where there is an increase in Z. With an increase in Z, the output increases. That's what we see direct. This is a direct relationship. With an increase in Z, the output increases. This is one thing that we see instantaneously. Now, back to what we did in our midterm and the assignment, what we saw was that whenever there's an increase in Z, what happens to the marginal product of labor? Anyone to help me? With an increase in Z, what happens to the marginal product of labor? John, is there anyone who can answer in there?
Yeah, people are saying it increases.
It increases, right? So what happens to the demand of our workers?
Wouldn't that also increase?
Exactly. We demand more workers then. So we have an increase in demand with an increase in Z. So these are the things that you have to keep your eye on as you do this exercise. First of all, when Z increases, there's a direct effect on the output, shifts up. Also with a Z increase, there's going to be a direct impact on our amount of labor demanded, right? So these are the two things that we see. This guy is up. This guy is also up. Output has increased. Wage has increased. You see what happens in here. Is that okay? What happens to the interest rate? Nothing, right? There's nothing here in terms of the interest rate. These are the two things that we can see. With this guy increasing and this guy increasing and increases, output increases. Is that okay with everyone? So our output now shifts towards this direction, giving the same amount of interest rate. Questions?
No questions so far.
Good. So the rest of the exercise, you might want to have a look at them and try them by yourself. Let's see whether you can come across intuitions that will help you work them out the more. So for this chapter, I will really advise that you keep the diagrams in mind, get to see how they work, because I don't have much in terms of equations here. So just make sure you understand the diagrams, and I might have to ask for diagrams. Now, having dealt with the labor supply, let's quickly go to the labor demand. Sorry, having dealt with the output supply, let's go to the output demand. So just like what we saw.
Oh, sorry, we have a question.
Yeah, feel free.
What is the intuition behind an increase in R causing an increase in Y?
Well, yeah, it depends on where it started from. It started from the fact that with an increase in R, you have better opportunity of having a higher return whenever you save. So individuals wouldn't like to take leisure anymore. They wouldn't like to go to beaches anymore. They just want to just work and get a higher amount of income and save so as to get this higher interest. So when people are working more, the whole idea is that with a higher amount of working hours, there's going to be a higher amount of output. But it all started from the fact that there was a higher increase in interest rate. So you might not see the direct relationship if you just look at interest rate and output, but if you put labor supply in between the two, you see it coming out clearly. And that's the reason why we had those three graphs. Is that okay with the questionnaire? Okay.
Yeah, looks all right.
Okay. Now let's go to the demand and let me see. So remember the demand equation, we have Y equals C plus I plus G. We still have a closed economy, so net export is 0. We have the investment in here because we have 2 periods. Just like what we saw earlier, we realize that our consumption decision depends heavily on our interest rate, and our investment decision also depends heavily on our interest rate. These two things do depend on our interest rate, whilst the rest don't. So if that's the case, a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. We know that when interest rate is extremely higher, the marginal cost of borrowing might be higher than the marginal benefit, which will end up reducing our investment decision. Again, when interest rate is extremely higher, we have a higher chance of getting higher return, so we expect to save more and consume less. So this guy also comes down here. So we can directly see the relationship between R and Y if we put the C and I in the equation. This is much clearer compared to the labor supply setting. Is that okay, Alex? Okay, yeah. So this is the first part of the argument. If you have any question, let me know. I will leave the first diagram on labor demand, and I'll just combine the two to make things much easier. So if we understand this diagram, a couple of things that we need to keep in mind is interest rate affects output through these two, and not through the government spending.
Sorry, sir. We have a question.
Sure.
But it is the opposite, because an increase in R will cause decrease in Y. Is it because of YS and YD?
Yeah, this is YD, right? This is demand, right? Remember the first one we did was YS, the amount of supply from the firms. And this is YD, which is the demand, right? So we get to know, let's keep an eye on the Ys. One is YD, one is YS. Just like the labor supply, one is NS and one is ND, right? So at the end of the day, we'll combine the YD and then YS in the market. If there are further questions, please draw my attention. John.
Not right now, no. Well,
okay.
Yeah, no, not right now.
Okay. So let me quickly see what I can do with this equation. I don't know whether I should clean it or I should leave it. Let me just draw it. Let's see what we have in the book. So we have the output, as I pointed out. This is the income. This is the demand, I believe, which is a combination of this guy, that guy, and that guy. So this equation, this line here, is going to be C as a function of R, I as a function of R, and G as a function of R. We have output here, but remember this output is going to be the output demand. We have the R here, and then we have the Y's given to us. So we have the current income, yeah, and we have the demand up there, the demand for current goods. So this is the demand for goods. And this is the current income. This is the current income. Or the output. Anyone works because it's just a. So we have these guys given to us. Now, my question here is, what happens to our decision-making process when our current income increases as a household? We saw that on Tuesday. What happens to our decision-making process when
Oh gosh, happened again, it seems. Nothing to do but wait again, I guess.
John, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, it went off for some time, I believe.
Yeah, it was, I think you were asking about the difference between the current income and the output or something along those lines.
Yeah,
And
sure.
then it disconnected for quite a while, so.
Okay, good. Is the view okay from your end? I'm trying to see whether it's okay.
Yeah, we can see.
Good. Now back to chapter 4. What happens to our demand when our current income increases as a household? First question. Anyone to help us?
Would it go up?
It goes up, right? So when you happen to work for Tim Hortons and they increase your income, you increase your consumption. Now the question here is, are you going to consume everything or are you going to keep parts for tomorrow? And we realized that due to the consumption smoothing idea, you might want to keep parts for tomorrow, right? So that's why you don't see one-for-one increment between this guy here and that guy. It's going to go this way. Now, the next question here is, what happens to our current income? What happens to our demand for goods when our current income increases? Given investments, there is nothing that's going to happen here. Investments or defense, there's no relationship between the two. And G, there's no relationship between the two. So where the major relationship happens to be is this guy here on the consumption side. And as you realize, on the consumption side, due to consumption smoothing, it's not going to be one-for-one. So this line is going to look like this. The higher the income, the higher the demand, but it's not one-for-one. It's more or less like diminishing because you are saving part of it for tomorrow. If that's okay with us, we can go ahead and then do more. If it's not, please let me know. Now let's assume that we have a given interest rate somewhere here, which is an interest rate R or whatever you might want to call it. To determine this graph, what happens to this line when interest rates increases? What happens to this line when interest rates increases? Anyone to help me? What happens to demand when interest rates increases?
It would shift. What? Some people are saying down, some people are saying up.
What do we mean by shifts down or up? Is it going to increase or decrease?
I believe down would mean decrease and then up
Good.
would mean increase.
Right, just like what we saw here. When interest rates increases, consumption comes down, investment comes down, which means this guy also comes down. So our line also comes down. So we have a C as a function of R2, which is higher than R1. I as a function of R2 plus G. This guy comes down. Now what happens to demand? Demand for goods also comes down. So the relationship between these two guys is opposite of the other, right? When interest rates increases, demand comes down. So I believe you might have this relationship playing out. As interest rates increases, demand comes down, YD comes down. As interest rates reduces, YD increases. So that's the relationship between interest rates and output in terms of the demand, and it's the opposite in terms of the supply. Questions? Questions?
Not at the moment, sir. No.
Okay, so feel free if you have questions, if you want to have any intuition behind it and all that, just let me know. Yeah. Questions?
Yes. We are assuming only R affects C and I, correct?
Yeah, no G, because government decision does not depend on G. Government's decision, which is G, does not depend on R.
Okay.
But you might want to do a comparative stat as to how it affects. Yeah.
He says, I mean, Y will not affect C and I.
Why is that? Y is our dependent variable here, and C and I our independent variable. So I don't know why you want to switch them.
So there's no reverse causation.
Yeah, because it's you might want to complicate the analysis based on that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we assume that there's no increase in Y that could lead to an increase in demand for goods. It's only a change in R, either up or down, that leads to that.
Yeah, because that's our focus. We want to capture the relation Y and R for now. Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Of course, there are a couple of shocks that will come in and affect our Y, but it's much easier for us to see the breakdown of the Y and see where the causes are coming from. So we are summing up everything in terms of YD.
Okay. And then is that a 45-degree line that you drew on the first graph?
Sure. And that's what we see in the book, 45-degree line. So my assumption is that we read before class. So if it's not clear, let me know. That's a 45-degree line. Yeah. So let's quickly go to the combination of the two. Now that we know our supply and we know our demand, let's see how the two play out. So if I'm to ask a very simple question, draw the demand line and the supply line, or the demand market, the goods market. It's easier because we now know that the goods market looks like this, where YD is here, inversely related. And within the goods market, we have the supply, which is also direct relationship, which is Y of a function of S. And this guy here will give us the total amount of output in equilibrium. This guy here determines our interest rate in equilibrium. So this is our goods market, technically. Again, we already saw what our other markets looks like, which is our labor market. There, we saw that there's going to be this guy here that we call ND, which is always going to come from the firm, the amount of labor demand. And we also have NS, which again is a function of interest rates that determines the amount of employment in equilibrium or the employment in the market. So we have R star here. So this is W star, I believe. So this is what we have to keep an eye on. We have the goods market, we have the labor market. If a question comes in and asks for a couple of comparative stats, I believe we should be able to do it. So let me see what they did here in terms of the comparative stats, and let's see how that helps. So let me try and pick one example in the book, and let's see how that plays a role. So we're going to take the example of a temporal increase in government spending. The example is going to be government spending increases. Government spending increases. Let's see how that plays a role here. Government spending, which is G, increases. So just like what we saw earlier, with an increase in government spending, we start by looking at what happens to taxes. You guys said there's going to be an increase in taxes. So taxes is going to increase. And with an increase in taxes, just like what you guys pointed out earlier, non-wage income is going to reduce. And with an increase in non-wage income, what happens? Anyone to help us? When non-wage, what's that, Alex? Labor supply increases, correct, right? Because taxes is up and income, non-wage income is down, we expect labor supply to increase. So that's the first point of call. So here, labor supply is technically going to increase because of the first effect. So labor supply is going to increase. But keep in mind, it's still going to be the same R1. Nothing happens to interest rates as of now. That's the first point of call. Is that okay with everyone? If it's not okay, let me know. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah, seems so.
Okay. What we also have to look at here is with an increase in labor supply, what happens to output supply? Anyone to help me? What happens to output supply? Anyone? When labor supply increases, output supply increases, right? Good. So we expect to see an increase in output supply. That is one part as well. Again, if the government increases its spending, what happens to output demand? When the government increases its spending, what happens to output demand? Anyone to help us? If the government increases its spending, what happens to output demand? Is there someone in there with it increases, right? Because remember, output demand is a function of C plus I plus G. So the question clearly said G has increased, so we expect this guy to increase. So that's, I think, we should keep an eye on. That's my red marker. That guy also increases. This guy has increased, this guy has increased. This guy has also increased. There's going to be an additional factor that you have to keep an eye on. And that's going to be maybe a second effect. What happens to the interest rates at the end of the day as well? Given what's happening in the goods market, what happens to the interest rate? What happens to the interest rate? So take a minute, type your name and type present, and you can try answering the question after that. So just type your name and type present. I'll come back and we answer the question.
Will the interest rate increase?
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a question.
Sure, feel free.
What is the relative amount of the shifting in YS and YD? Will YD shift more because it is directly affected by G?
It depends on the elasticity, right, of the labor supply as well. You don't know how sensitive labor supply is. So I think it's reasonable to make the assumption that because it's direct, the direct impact of the G is going to be higher. Yeah, which is a very good assumption to make. But at the same time, being careful as to the elasticity of labor supply in the market. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah, seems so.
Okay. So if you have further questions, let me know. So just like what you pointed out.
One more question.
Yeah.
So it's ambiguous?
It might be if you don't want to take a stand, but I think I'll go with the person who said because it's direct, the impact is going to be high. I'll go with the person, but at the same time, I'll agree with anyone who says we don't know the sensitivity of labor supply and how labor supply is going to increase. Is it going to increase us higher than we expect to see? Is that okay? Is that okay?
I think
Yeah.
so.
Sure. So as we realize, the interest rate is also going to increase. So this guy is going to increase and R will go up. So with an increase in interest rates, is there going to be a further reaction from the labor market? Do you expect to see any further reaction from the labor market? Anyone to help us? Is there going to be a further reaction from the labor market?
Oh, there would be. If the interest rate increases, then the labor supply will also increase.
Exactly. The labor supply will further increase, given the R2. So this guy further increases. So that's what you have to keep in mind. So at the end of the day, within the labor market, there is going to be a reduction in wage and an increase in the amount of labor employment rate. So,
and then Alex asks, so it won't stop? The effect will continue and continue, or? Yeah,
we
and then
might just take a stand and say that this is the end of the period and that's the end of it. If not, we just keep on looping like that.
Oh, okay. And then another person asks, can we not argue that we are in the third period then? I know we had the two previous curves with R1.
Well, yeah, I think that's what Alex is saying, right? That's to say that you have to come back to the goods market and make R as a function of the new N and all that, right? So for now, Question?
No.
Yeah, sure. If that's not clear, let me know. So the whole idea is we keep on looping. So it's now 11:25. Type your name without any question and type present again for the last time. No one should type any question for now. Just type your full name and type present. And I'll come back to Osama's question. And Alex, if you don't mind, do you mind writing your full name for me again? I think I'm having a tough time getting to pick up your name. I need to assign the participation grade. So when they are done, feel free to help me out. John, in terms of the question, if you can read Osama's question out to me.
Oh, sure. Let me just go back here. Here we go. So what would we say for period 2 then?
What do we?
So what would we say for period 2 then?
We don't save anything at period 2 because we're going to die the next period. But for now, what we are assuming is the time that we find ourselves in does not really matter as of now. What really matters is the reaction to interest rates. So you might want to assume that we collapse every period to one period and see the reaction within the same period. There's not much in terms of savings decision and all that. Unless, of course, we might want to look at how that affects C and I, which I agree. But for now, the analysis that we just did, it does not necessarily affect C and I. So the timing is not of essence, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. If you have further questions, let me know. If there are none, then that will be the end of this chapter. And we start with the new chapter next week. So remember, next week, I believe we have a quiz, is it? Yeah, I think next week we have a quiz, if I'm right. I'll check Canvas and see whether I can come up with a couple of questions. And if you have any questions, we still have 3 minutes. Feel free to ask. If there are no questions, then I'll see you guys next week. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John.
Oh, hello?
Yeah.
Sorry, one
Yeah.
question here. Could you, oh, this is Ansong. Could you send me the recording for this class since I didn't copy down the notes due to the disconnections?
Yeah, it's gonna be on Canvas as soon as I'm done. I'll send it to Canvas.
And then another, is the quiz on Tuesday?
No, I think I made mention that it's gonna be on Thursday, right? So you guys know for sure.
Which chapters are the quiz on?
I believe it's gonna be the chapter that we just finished covering in terms of 9 and 11, if I'm right. But I probably have to go and check.
Did we do chapter 11 today?
I believe so. That was chapter 11. Yeah. I don't know whether the labeling in the version of my book is consistent with yours, but this is chapter 11 for mine.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions, John?
No, I think that's all.
Okay then. See you guys next week.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're also welcome. Bye.